Hello, everyone, and welcome to 180 Degrees of Impact. I'm Matt Scott, and today I'm here with Regina from the Food Recovery Network. How are you doing, Regina?
I'm really well. How are you?
I'm good. And I'm excited to talk with you and to hear more about your work and your story. I really struggle, and I really don't like to give people's introductions for them. So I'm really hoping you could start us out with an introduction of who you are. How do you introduce yourself to people?
Oh, sure. My name's Regina Northouse. I'm the executive director with Food Recovery Network, and I usually introduce myself by saying that and that I've been in the nonprofit sector for a little over 10 years now, and the reason I'm in the nonprofit sector is because I feel like growing up, I was really provided a lot of helping hands along the way, and have dedicated my career and my personal life to helping others. So something along those lines.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd really want to hear more about that. But before we even take a step back to hearing more about your history and your backgrounds, could you share more about the Food Recovery Network? What are some of the highlights? Like, what's your elevator pitch when you meet someone and they ask what you do?
Absolutely. Food Recovery Network is the largest student movement fighting waste and hunger in America. We are on 230 college campuses across the country, and since 2011, we recovered over 2.1 million pounds of food that is perfectly good food that otherwise would have gone to waste, and we were able to donate that food with the power of students and make sure our neighbors are fed.
Yeah, where did that idea initially even come from? Because it sounds super intuitive, but also like something that I wouldn't think of, in college, or when I'm at a restaurant, etc.
It's an incredibly simple solution to a really complex problem on two fronts: on the environmental side, when we waste food, and on the human side, when people are food insecure or when they don't know where their next meal is coming from. So whenever I talk to people about it, the same reaction that you had is, oh my gosh, why didn't I think of that? I've yet to meet a person who has said to me, you know what I love to do? I love to waste food. So everyone is always like, oh my gosh, there's so much, guilt wrapped around, when we throw away food, or people say, I really hate when I see that at a restaurant or whatnot. So it was actually Food Recovery Network started in 2011 by college students who, I always talk about it in terms of, for those of us who did go to college or university, it's a really special time in our lives where we're trying to figure out, who we are as people. We're really, coming of age. And at the same time, in the classroom, you're learning about these really complex theoretical issues that face all of us around the globe. So those two kinds of things were combining for the co-founders of Food Recovery Network. And they tried to do different events and different activities to be impactful people in their community, and it just wasn't quite working for them. And over time, one thing kind of led to another, where they realized, wait, actually here at the University of Maryland, we're throwing away a lot of food. We're also out in our community. We know people are hungry. We can just take that food and bring it to the people who need it the most. And they approached their dining service manager to try to get that concept started. And at first, the dining manager said no, because the concept was so new and so scary and foreign, that it was just easier to shut that idea down. But they persisted. And I have to say, I never want to generalize whole entire swaths of generations, but, the millennial generation, the grit and the resiliency and the tenacity, I really feel like the co-founders of Food Recovery Network exemplify that, when they just wouldn't stop with this idea. And eventually they were able to get their dining manager on board. And on top of that, she thought it was such a great idea that she infused her expertise, helped them to figure out how to handle the food safely, and to make sure that the project model was solid. And that's literally how Food Recovery Network started. One school, after a couple of months of recovering food, they'd recovered a few thousand pounds of food.
Yeah.
So when you think about one school, one dining hall, thousands of pounds of food, and they just started calling up their friends across the country to do the same thing. And lo and behold, several years later, here we are, 2.1 million pounds of food that we've recovered.
Wow. Yeah, it's so like inspiring to see the energy that you have, even just talking about the story of when the network was founded. Like, why did you decide to get involved, and what was it about Food Recovery Network, or even about food and nutrition, that just really resonated with you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I love what we do at Food Recovery Network. I feel like I can tell that origin story so many times, and I get re-inspired every time I tell it. So my background is in individual leadership development. So I used to work at a leadership development organization when I was in Pittsburgh, and what I did there was I helped employers in all sectors create internship programs for their businesses. Now, this was so long ago that at that time, people didn't even really know what an internship was. Can you imagine? This was so long ago. I would say internship, and people would say, what is that? But in terms of supporting business growth through creating a pipeline of talent, so that's what I did every day. So my desire to support college students has always been there. And then, over time, I went off to other organizations that was all focused on supporting people and being better team members and being better leaders, because in the nonprofit sector in particular, we're tasked with trying to solve some of the most complex social issues, homelessness, gender equality, food insecurity. These are really big and complex issues, and we're only as strong as the people who are trying to solve them. So my goal is to support people in being their best selves when they're at work. And so when the board was looking for their first external executive director, moving from a startup organization to one that really needed to secure and strengthen its foundation before it could, really expand, my skill set in terms of doing that kind of leadership development really resonated with them, because when I think about, all the student leaders across the country who work with their Food Recovery Network chapter, they are leaders in their communities, and they are really running their own, individual nonprofit. So it just made a lot of sense for me as a next step in my career to support this movement. And I can say, maybe a conversation for another time, but what I've learned along the way, this is my first step as, being an executive director, and a lot of the experiences that I've had, even in my, day job, but also in my volunteering and civic engagement work, was really focused in on trying to be an effective leader with this kind of organization.
Yeah, that's really powerful to hear. It sounds like your transition into this work was a really organic transition. Like, I'm thinking a lot about, you mentioned the work that you do supporting young student leaders, and I think that's always so inspiring to me. Like, I went to George Washington University, where I was involved in a ton of different student organizations, doing a ton of different things at once. And so while you are so busy with classes and with your academics, you're also so busy socially getting to know the world and yourself. And then also just trying to figure out like what you want to do with your life and what you're passionate about. How do you all get students on board? I'm sure it's not that difficult considering how important the topic area is, but what is it that you do to get students to take that little bit of a leap to start their own chapter based on what you have going on?
Yeah, before I answer that question, I'm really excited to let you know that, maybe you already know this, but GW has a chapter with Food Recovery Network, so really excited about that.
Raise high. That's our big
right? That's awesome. I have to say, the issue of food waste and food insecurity is something that, the students, people who are in college right now, it resonates with them. Maybe when I was younger, that was recycling, where, and maybe people who are a little bit older than me, for them, it was drunk driving. So these big social issues that now we think about, oh yeah, recycling, everyone does that. But when I was a kid, that wasn't the case. In the 80s and in the 70s, driving drunk was like something that, a lot of people just did and didn't really think about until, society came together and said, we're going to put some structure around this and try to move the needle for the better. And I really feel like that with food recovery. So a lot of times students definitely come to us, and they literally Google, my school's wasting food, what can I do about it? And then we're the first organization that comes up. And so they oftentimes get in touch with us, and we have a conversation from there, either that school has a chapter or they don't. If they do have a chapter, then we'll connect any of those students to the existing leaders with that chapter. And if they don't, then we talk to them about what it takes to start a chapter and see if they're interested in that. Because as I said earlier, when we think about every single chapter across the country is different. We are in big schools, small schools, private, liberal, Christian, HBCUs. Every single school is so unique, urban and rural. And to get something started, that skill set is oftentimes different than what it takes to maintain something. And I think about that in terms of, when I first started at FRN, it was started by entrepreneurs, and I'm an intrapreneur. So I'm going to strengthen something that's already there. The skill set can be very different. And so we really need to be clear to students about the different steps that it takes. And at our national headquarters, my amazing team, I wish you could meet them. They're so fantastic. They work with students every single step of the way. We really build a deep relationship as much as we can with every single student who's interested in working with us, because at the end of the day, we're not an app. We are people trying to connect with other people in our community. And so that starts with us, at the headquarters, and really supporting students to have conversations with their dining managers to say, hey, I want to recover this food. Doing a landscape analysis of their community to figure out, where can I bring this food at the end of the day, at the end of a meal, that makes sense for that particular organization. So it is all about relationships and setting up that structure.
What are some of the biggest challenges that the students run into along the process? I know you mentioned connecting with dining managers, but I'd really love to know some of those other challenges that they face along the way getting their chapter up off the ground.
It's so fascinating and so inspiring. Some of the challenges are, and every year we reach out to our chapters to ask them, what are your goals for the semester or for the year? And let's work on that. So some of the goals that our chapters have are, they are recovering from one dining hall and they want to expand to 2. So what does that look like? What are the conversations that need to happen there? A lot of times a big challenge that our students have is every chapter has a core leadership group. And then from there, they get volunteers that actually help with the recoveries. So recruiting, managing volunteers is something that we have a lot of resources for that. And we're building even more this year because it's difficult for our students, especially when you think about peer-to-peer management of like, hey, you guys signed up to go on a recovery and no one showed up. Yeah. That actually means XYZ for us. So really being able to communicate effectively to your peer groups or to people who are older than you, that's often a challenge for our students. They want to do, fundraising. We are able to provide a certain level of grant money for our chapters to get materials that they need. And a lot of times they'll do their own fundraising, and sometimes the students say, how do we do that? And another big thing that we're working on to help mitigate any number of challenges that our students might have is really fostering connection between and among chapters, where the national headquarters, maybe we don't even need to be involved in the conversation. We want to hear how it's going, of course, but students learn so well from one another because they're all in the same boat together. Even if you're in California, if you're trying to expand to your 3rd dining hall or go from 2 recoveries a week to 7 recoveries a week, who best to talk to but maybe somebody in Minnesota who has done that same thing, and you already have that foundation. You already know what it's like to be an FRN chapter. So we're really working to build more of those structures this year.
Wow, it's really inspiring to see that. I think the work that you're doing is tough at another level, because what you're doing is not just focusing on, which, don't get me wrong, this I'm sure would be incredibly tough, but you're not just focusing on getting in touch personally with the universities and the dining halls. What you're doing is coordinating a bunch of people and in turn building a bunch of like, micro movements across the country on all these different university campuses. And I can imagine, you mentioned how tough it could be to, let's say, manage a bunch of volunteers when you're a chapter. And I know that from my experience on campus in student organizations also, how tough it could be to get people to show up just because of all the competing commitments. What are some of the challenges, or what's difficult about the work that you do in coordinating all of that?
Oh, wow. Yeah. And I have to say, thank you so much for your affirmation of, the work that we do. That really, it feels good, because I think what we do is so important. And as much as I love the work that I do, I love my team, oh my gosh, I've had an opportunity to meet so many amazing students across the country. It's hard. It is really hard because it is diffuse. We really want to support each chapter in being their best selves, and that does play out in different ways for different chapters. However, a big part of the work that we do at headquarters is to figure out, what are those themes and what are those trends? And from there, we are able to build new resources for our students so that they can do their work better. So that is always the big challenge of figuring out, is this a real thing that is happening across the country? Do we need to build steps to, make a tool for that? Or will this play out on its own? So that is really such an interesting part of the work that we do, figuring out. We actually just got a really amazing grant through the Taproot Foundation to work on our metrics. So right now, it's awesome. Right now, our biggest metrics are, how many chapters we have, how many pounds of food across the country we've been able to recover, how many volunteers do we engage. And those are all really important, because those are all amazing stories and they're actual people, they're not just data sets. But as we work to further build out our leadership in the food recovery space, which is still, a pretty new space, space in terms of being on the national consciousness. We have, years under our belt. And so being able to turn all the work that we do into a new or longitudinal trajectory of our impact is something that I'm working on now. So are we asking the right questions of our students, of our partner agencies? What are we missing? And how are we going to turn that into something that's meaningful to show we are part of the effort that is moving the needle to reduce food waste at the source?
You mentioned the impact that you're making, and that it's not just, I think you said something really briefly about how it's not just about the numbers in a sense, right? Could you talk a little bit more about the impact that you're making? I especially want to hear and understand, like, who's really benefiting from the work that you're doing? Because I know real people on the other end of this. This is food and this is life and our health. Like, what's that impact?
I always say, the big part, because of my background in leadership development, that what we do is we support and foster leadership. Our students happen to recover food and feed people through that, but the work that they're really engaged in is being civic-minded individuals in their communities. And that's really what sets us apart from a lot of other, recovery systems. When you think about it, sometimes our students, maybe they recover 100 pounds of food in one meal. Well, a grocery store, they can recover 100,000 pounds in a day if they wanted to, right? So when you think about recovering food and feeding people, it might seem like we are not the most efficient method for that, but it's the seeds that we are planting are deeper than the immediate, okay, now there's food for people. So really working on that civic mindedness and that civic engagement, and that will transfer once our students graduate to whatever job they're working on. That becomes their lens and how they live their lives. So that's the impact that I feel, when I say we're not just numbers, and we see it playing out, all the time. Actually, a really fun and inspiring thing that we just heard was a student. She graduated, and I think she had a job out before she decided to go to grad school. But in her pursuit of where she wanted to go to grad school, she knew that she wanted to find a school that actually had another FRN chapter because she wanted to be so connected. So it really, altered where she wanted to go to school. And so we hear stories like that all the time. Our students, even after they bring the food to their hunger fighting partner agencies, what we call the places where we donate the food, many times our students will stay and volunteer. They will do mentoring. There's one student, he knows how to dance, and so where they bring the food was like a community center where they taught dance to little kids, and he's like, oh, maybe I can start volunteering. So he started to be a teacher to teach little kids. We've had some of our students, they actually do a lot of cleanup for the partner agencies. And when I say the partner agencies, I mean these are homeless shelters, soup kitchens, food pantries, the nonprofits that are really tasked with some really difficult things to do. Their goals are hard, keeping people off the streets and having a roof over their heads. So those are the kinds of relationships that are fostered through our work, and that's really where I feel the impact is. It's not always a number, but I'm going to try to get some numbers. Yeah. But we have really good ones. But with that metrics and rethinking our metrics for FRN of the future, as we do mature in our ability, that's going to be a big focus of my work.
I think from my perspective, just looking at the work that you're doing, and sorry for patting you on the back so much, but I think it's so important because it's like, you look at a college campus, I look at my experience, and I was involved in a bunch of different organizations, including GW Students Against Sexual Assault, which was even before like the big It's On Us campaign and all of the big national campaigns. Now, we were just trying to, get something going for that. And I've always thought about how, sure, we are addressing sexual assault in that example, but I didn't really think about what you spoke about, which is building leaders and getting young people and getting students to become community minded, which is so awesome to see and hear, because like you have the organizations we worked with for Students Against Sexual Assault, or for the other student organizations I was with, and there's your organization, and there are others addressing different areas who work with students. And so at the end of the day, we have more and more young leaders who care about making an impact, regardless of whether it's for food and nutrition, food waste, or sexual assault, or whatever that case might be. So 2 big thumbs up for that, because I think that's
and to you. Awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. Cool. It's really cool. And I was actually just talking to someone yesterday about the work that we do, and she was saying, the reason why she wanted to talk with me was because we are really intentional about the fact that we are trying to change behavior to prevent food waste. Unfortunately, through the work that we do, hopefully, again, this is like the long-term impact of our work potentially, but, there's 48.1 million Americans who are hungry today, this moment in time. Last year, it was that same number, so while we're not a band-aid to the situation, the work that we do, isn't policy centered. It's not trying to get, that livable wage, and, but we are really intentional about that kind of, behavior change. And that's where the impact comes in. And she said, a lot of organizations aren't able to actually say that the education piece is really critical and forward in the work that they do, like it is for ours. And it sounds like, the organizations that you were involved with too. So important.
Yeah. And it reminds me that on August 12th is the United Nations International Youth Day, which is really big on this theme of celebrating how important an impact is. On top of that, it would be great to hear from you. What advice do you have for other organizations who want to engage young people to get them to make an impact?
I would say, especially if the organization isn't working with youth currently, start slowly and get a few young people to really be the ambassadors for you. When you start getting younger people involved, I would also say you probably have to loosen up a little bit and don't worry about taking control. Really let young people express themselves throughout their ideas. And even if you've tried that idea, you don't need to tell them that, and maybe they'll try it and it will work. I really am so inspired by the problem solving that I've seen, the fun that our students have with the work that they're doing. And that is truly that spirit and that essence you cannot replicate. So really let young people do what they need to do, and just, sit back, and there's a lot to learn from young people. I've learned so much new stuff from my team. Oh my gosh, a lot around technology too, because it's not a strong suit of mine, but I've learned a ton, and just like all these different methods using technology that I never would have known before. New insights too, I think is really an important, when you let young people be part of your conversations, the insights you can reap are just, they abound. And I'm really proud to say, for the first time ever, Food Recovery Network is launching our student and alumni advisory board for that very reason. We're really on the ground. We have lots of ways to hear stories and pathways of leadership, and this is going to be another one for us, another sounding board for FRN, because we are so committed to hearing the voice of the people who are actually doing the work.
Yeah, that's so powerful and so important. And I think one thing I've realized just over the past year, especially in my work, is people often ask, like, how can we get young people or younger people involved in our work? And I think the big mistake that organizations often make is that they don't ask young people, how could we get you engaged? What could we do for you? And it seems that you're really doing that in a powerful way, and it's paying off. And I really can't wait to see how that pays off more and more over time with FRN. I do have one final question, though. It's my favorite question about you and your life and your story. If your life story were a book or a documentary, which it probably will be one day, what would the title be and why?
I have been rolling around with that for a while. My staff will tell you I'm actually really bad at titling things. I'm like, that sounds great. We have a new position we're hiring for. Like, you guys can title it whatever you want. That sounds awesome to me. So I think that if I were to have, maybe I'd say a documentary, because I love documentaries, but I'm an English major, so I also love to read. So this is a wonderful question for me. Then I would need to have, in that title, something around, being hybrid and being a citizen and, impactful, and being within a nation, because for me, as a multiracial person, it's been such an interesting place to be, and all the different stories that I've collected just from being a brown person. But so I think of hybridity in that way, but then I also think of hybrid in the sense of economic structures in our country, and then also the deep desire to be a good person and a good citizen. So something along those lines. I think it's still baking a little bit.
I think there's definitely a title in there somewhere. And I will let whoever's watching take time, take all of that, even roll back a little bit just to kind of synthesize it all. But I'll let you know if I think, or once I think of the proper title, so that we could officially get that book published, or that documentary published and out there. I do want to ask, though, building on that question, so, what advice is it that you have from your unique perspective? You mentioned being a hybrid. So, from the perspective of doing all that you do, being a multiracial person, what's one piece of advice you would give someone who doesn't know how to get started, or is struggling to begin to do something that makes the world a better place?
Oh, that's such a great question. Thanks for asking that. Advice that I would give to that person, so I would want to know a little bit more about that person. You know, are they shy? You know, do they like talking to people? Because if that person was able to talk to people, that's absolutely the first thing that I would say. When I was first starting out, I volunteered a ton for everything. You know, if there was an event going on, I would, you know, be at the registration table, giving people their name tags so I could talk with them, so I can get into the event for free. You know, eventually I started to join a bunch of nonprofit boards when I had enough experience under my belt, doing things that were outside of what I did 9 to 5. And that really helped me to, you know, draw in my own experiences, which I think are really critical, make mistakes without it being too costly. And, you know, again, really getting to know other people, because those people are the ones that you can call up later on and say, hey, I've been rolling around with this idea. What do you think? So I think it is just getting involved, and you can start small, you know, and just asking a lot of questions of people, just out of curiosity, like very much like this conversation today. When you first asked me like about my career, you know, hearing about the different pathways that people have taken. I know that people always feel really flattered when you can ask them that. So I think just asking questions, being involved, being curious.
Yeah, and I'll also say, just as we wrap it up, that I'm so glad you said that, because it's kind of hard for me to wrap my head around, because in a lot of ways that's what I'm doing with 180 Degrees of Impact, like talking with people about their stories, asking questions, and gaining understanding of what it takes for them to accomplish what they're accomplishing, for you to accomplish what you're accomplishing on the journey that you're on. And you know, it's powerful just to know that conversations and sitting down with people and just getting a better understanding of what's out there, but also what are the possibilities for you that could take you so far. And so as you could probably guess, we could be here for hours talking, I'm sure.
Okay.
But you know, I definitely want to, as we wrap it up, get any links from you. So where are you on the internet? What should people check out when it comes to you, Regina, and when it comes to FRN?
Great. So our website is really super simple. It's foodrecoverynetwork.org. And our Twitter is Food Recovery. I just think, yeah, just Food Recovery. And I'm Regina DM. So I would love for people to engage with us. We're also on Facebook. I am too. We're on Twitter, Instagram. We have a Snapchat. That's another thing. I have no clue how to use Snapchat. My crew does. So we are really highly engaged on social media. And so I would love for, you know, all of your viewers to connect with us, because we're super nice. We're really passionate. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of volunteering opportunities. We're trying to do a lot more gleaning, you know, for events for people who aren't necessarily in college to connect to. So we're really trying to like increase the number of events that we're doing for people. So yeah, don't be shy. We'll welcome you into our network. So, but Matt, I had a quick question for you.
Sure.
What would be your title to your documentary or memoir? Because I'm like so inspired by you.
Wow. I'll answer that question. I haven't been asked that question, so it's a tough one. I think the title for my book or documentary, which I think, you know, I've passively thought about as I asked this question, would probably be, I think the title of my book or documentary would be The Courage to Live. Because I feel like through 180 Degrees of Impact, through my work at Second Muse, just through life, through different events and just happenstance, I've met a lot of people who talk about like what it takes to do what they're doing. Because I know like social entrepreneurship is not easy, and taking that leap is not easy. Even if it's like being part of an organization that is not easy. And so I feel like it takes some level of courage to like kind of make that big leap and say, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to change the world in the way I want to, rather than playing it safe. And with a lot of people, like the inspiration for that is from literally from like life or death circumstance. Like I was talking with one person, Eric Dowds, who I know him from high school, but he started a number of organizations, including one called Diabetes Abroad. He's now biking across America as part of that. Another person named Tayo Roxon, who is a 3-time TEDx speaker, who is, doing all this awesome work today to increase like diversity and inclusion and cultural competency. But at the same time, he really made that big leap to do what he's doing because of like a near-death experience in a car accident. So there's a very literal way of looking at it, but then there's also just, this idea of, okay, I want to live my best life and do what I can to change the world. So I think that's what my book would be about. My book would definitely have a lot of insights from other people, I think, because I feel like I'm like a sponge taking in what you had to say and all that. But for anyone who wants to get the book one day, they can check out 108 Degrees of Impact. It's online. We're online, www.lets.care, on Twitter at Let's You Care, and facebook.com/Let's You Care. So just like Food Recovery Network, just go on the Let's.Care website, or go on the FRN website, and just the links are probably all there because there are so many ways to connect. But thanks again for joining in, Regina.
Thanks so much for your time, Matt. It was so much fun talking with you, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Yeah, and we'll definitely have another one soon. But for everyone else who's watching, until next time, keep impacting.